Hey Dana, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you finally. Yeah. And first of all, I'd say that I'm a big fan of Marfan, and that's quite an honor to have you on my podcast. So thank you very much for that.
Pleasure. And where are we talking? Where are you coming from?
As I said for the interview, I'm from Brazil, and I'm
Brazil?
talking from Brazil.
Which part?
I'm from south of Brazil,
South of Brazil.
almost in Argentina, Uruguay.
Oh yeah.
Could you tell me a bit about the period you've been here in Brazil? I know Mike Sandman was a huge fan of Brazil. He lived here with our Marfan as well. How was this experience for you?
You come to Brazil?
Yeah.
Oh, it was always a dream for Morphine to come to Brazil because, as you said, that Mark uh lived there and wanted to come back with the band. So we weren't we were very, looking forward to coming back or going in the first place. And the first time we were able to go was with Orchestra Morphine. Geez, when was that? I have to look for that one. That was
2018.
2018. Thank you. There you go. With We went to Ouro Preto. That was our first time in Brazil. We spent some time in Rio and drove drove up to Ouro Preto and back, and had a very beautiful view of the ocean on the way home. The driver took us along the ocean, I guess, heading sort of east or north. I'm not even sure, but we're going up the coast to Rio. Saw beautiful beaches and just miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of beaches. It was amazing to see. And then, we've been up to Sao Paulo, and we've been back, with Vapors of Morphine. We've been up to Sao Paulo. We played the Sao Paulo Jazz Festival, and back in. Do you have the date for that one? Because I can't even remember which one that is either. But
No, that
McCoy Tyner was playing that night that year, and I could hear McCoy Tyner playing from my hotel window. The streets were filled with people, and the food was amazing. We got taken to this amazing estate outside of Sao Paulo, up in the mountains, and were treated to this amazing meal of, the room was filled with food and people coming in and buying a ticket and going from room to room, getting different things to eat. And the people, everyone I've met was so beautiful and wonderful and kind and happy and generous. It seems that when you see people who are very wealthy, sometimes they don't seem to be very happy, but somehow even the people in Brazil who had very little seemed to me have the happiest of anybody I've ever met.
Sometimes it's just a state of mind.
And that's what I think of when I think of Brazil,
Yes. Do you listen to any Brazilian music or artists?
I've been listening to this woman, Rosita. Look her up. Rosito. What's her last name? Okay. Rosalia de Souza. You've heard of her?
I
Rosalia
don't,
de Souza?
I don't think so. Let me Google that.
Well, of course, then who's the great saxophonist, the big man with the white hair. He plays music with like indigenous Brazilian music. There's a video of him in the water in the river playing and making sound, and then going into the water and changing the sound. But
You're not talking about Hermeto Pascoal.
yes,
No,
thank you.
him? All right. I watched him live once. It's incredible.
Yeah, and of course, the classics, Joe Beam and Astro Gilberto and all that stuff. It's great.
Cool. Interesting. All right. I'll follow timeline now. I want to know a bit about your beginning of music, and your first musical contacts, if you had any music influence at your home when you're younger, and in the first instrument you learned how to play.
It was my first introduction to a musical instrument was the piano. At home with my grandmother, she had a piano, and I remember very early on just sort of sitting at the piano, being fascinated by the smell of it and the old wood and the keys, and just being a very young child and being fascinated by the idea that you could hit a key and get a sound, you know. I was hooked from that point on. I wasn't very serious about my musical education. I took a pretty undisciplined approach to it. But it was something I always felt inside and had always gravitated to. I learned the clarinet was my first instrument in band. And then from there, we went to saxophone and played tenor saxophone in high school and the school band. And towards the end of my high school, going into early 20s, that in college, I was starting to jam with other people. Jam is in quotations because I was trying to figure it out too. I didn't really know what I was doing, and learning was definitely part of the process. Has been ever since. But I was learning to play. I was learning to play my saxophone. I was learning how to play with other people. I was learning how to get sound and trying to harness all of that at the same time.
Do you remember the music you used to listen at home, like from parents and when you were younger?
Well, my father was and still is a huge fan of music, and he had his dad's records and his brother's records, and I was very exposed to music and my what my dad had collected. He loves opera, and so we would hear a lot of opera on Sunday mornings. But he also had a lot of big band. Gene Krupa, Glenn Miller, Tommy, the Dorsey brothers, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan, Billie Holiday. And so he had a lot of that big band stuff because that was his era. He and my mom met together dancing at a dance when they were young people and fell in love at a dance. So music has always been connected to the whole social connection of community and of their generation and my generation as well, kind of continued.
Sounds a bit like my dad as well.
Yeah.
He was a drummer. He used to play jazz and Brazilian music.
What's your dad's name?
Sérgio.
Sergio?
Sérgio, we used to call him Jaburu, which is a bird from the north of Brazil. I'm not sure why I had this nickname, but it was from his teenager years, I guess.
That's a great nickname. Is he still with us?
No, he passed in 2019 from cancer.
My condolences.
But yeah, I learned how to play drums with him, so it's...
You did? You're a drummer?
Yeah, I learned music from him, so he's still alive in many ways, I guess.
Yeah, man, that's right. You bet it is.
As a teenager playing sax, what were like your big influences in rock, blues, jazz, and
As a teenager, I listened to a lot of guitar. I was very influenced by guitar players. That's what really interests me and turned me on. Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, the sound of his guitar was something that just, you feel it inside of you. That was the kind of thing that really caught my attention, is the music that could just make something happen inside of you. It became a physical feeling, and the sound of one person who can create that, like, of course, Jimi Hendrix. But as I got older, I started to get more interested in the smaller jazz bands that came out of the 40s and into the 50s, 60s, smaller groups. How big band emerged, kind of for economical purposes, basically jazz evolved because the economics of putting a big band together became more difficult. So smaller groups formed, and they produced this amazing body of era of music. And so Coltrane was the first real saxophone player that kind of like overlapped for me from Jimi Hendrix. You could hear what Hendrix was doing and his wall of sound, and you could almost, put Coltrane's Interstellar Space right underneath that. And, doing things on the saxophone that were beyond the imagination, beyond the ability of, the known ability of what the instrument could do, but also putting all that together with an amazing intention and composition, and then also sprinkling that with the improvisation of jazz and the freedom that came with it. So all of those things combined, really grabbed me in terms of complexity of what went into that.
Cool. Yeah. Was your family back then supportive about you being a musician?
Absolutely, yep. My dad is Ed Colley, who is still with us, and he is a painter. My mom, Dana Colley, who is was a chemistry teacher, and now they're retired, living very nearby on the North Shore, and they've always been incredibly supportive. My dad, I think, is probably not only my biggest fan, but the biggest fan of all of his children and grandchildren in terms of whatever they decide they want to do in their lives. I have my niece and nephew are in a band. They're called Exit 18, and they are. I think their grandfather, my dad, has attended many of their shows in the front row to the extent that one of the last shows he went to, he actually had his ears damaged, and now he needs an ear. Now he has to go and get an uh, hearing aid, which he's not too happy about.
Yes. Do you have any records to?
Oh yeah, you can find him on Spotify. Exit
Okay.
18. Julia Perry is the lead singer. Dylan Perry is the drummer.
All right. Was your first band as a sax player?
Hmm. Well, the Whitman Hanson Regional High School Jazz Band,
Hmm.
uh, in high school would be the first kind of time of playing with people. But I guess the first serious band would have to be a band called Three Colors, which was in the 80s. And we were kind of a pop guy influenced post new wave, boys club that, were learning how to play their instruments and write songs. And we had a really great time and kind of grew up together quite a bit. We're in our early 20s. That band made a couple records. We went to England on a whim to live in London to see if we could break out there. We didn't, so we came home. We had a couple of good gigs. So we opened up for Billy Bragg at the Fulham Palace Ground in London, which was our first show. Billy Bragg was kind enough because I think we had done something together in Boston, and we may have opened up for him at Northeastern, I believe, like a college. And we were kind of clueless, so I think we probably hounded him enough to where he said, "Okay, you can warm up for me if you guys can get yourselves over here. You can warm up for a gig." He was very generous, and somehow we got ourselves over there and convinced the writer Tony Fletcher, who wrote a lot of great books on music, The Jam, and others. You can find him, but he was writing for a magazine called NME at the time, and we contacted him because he had written a review of our first record and had done a just ridiculously favorable review. And to have him, to be coming from Boston and seeing a favorable review of your first record in NME blew our minds. So we just, I can remember Chris Harford running down the street with the article, waving it in the air. This was a newspaper back in the day when they had newspapers. So we went across the pond and we established ourselves there. We got a house. We forced this writer, Tony Fletcher, to manage us. Wasn't a manager, but we said, "No, you are now. We're coming over." And our first gig was with Billy Bragg, and it was a great, beautiful day outside. We're all wearing. I'd stolen. Sorry, this is a confession, but I had. I think I may have returned them eventually, but I had, let's say, borrowed. I borrowed some band jackets from my high school, band jackets that were matching, red with black lapels. You can actually see it in a video called One Big Tree by Three Colors, but they belonged to my stage band. And we borrowed those and took them with us. We had these matching red blazers that was absolutely ridiculous in so many ways, but we did this gig, had a great evening. We had, I think we had about 50 fans that were into what we did. And we did a couple of club dates. We limped around Europe for a couple tries and realized that it wasn't going anywhere for various reasons and came home and broke up.
You're talking about the video that's on YouTube from Three Colors.
Yeah.
I saw that before the
it?
interview. Yeah, I did. But I couldn't find any record. We asked for it.
Three Colors, yeah. Well, I'll see what I can find. There might be something kicking around.
I'm not sure if there's something available on the internet.
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure it's got to be out there by now.
All right. We'll move on a bit. Which moment have you met Mark Sandman? Do you remember like the first time you met him?
Um, First time I met him was we were playing a Three Colors. In fact, we're playing a gig at this place called The Rat, which was kind of renowned rock club in Boston, and it's no longer there at this point, but it was pretty famous and infamous, dingy little basement rock bar, with this bouncer doorman by the name of Mitch, who was the most intimidating person you've ever seen. He was probably 6'5", had white Brillo hair and a very tight goatee. Oh, and he dressed in a suit, and he spoke with a vocoder because he had had throat cancer.
Oh my
And
God.
he'd have this little device he'd put to his throat, and it'd say, ID, you
It
know,
sounds scary.
yeah. And but the truth was he was the sweetest guy in the world. And he was an amazing baritone player. He played baritone sax. And one day we were down there, and I'm getting off track here. We'll come back to when I met Mark, but and when we were setting up at this place we were playing and called the Rat, and the house engineer was playing some amazing jazz music, some amazing baritone sax. And I asked the guy, I said, "Who's the bass player?" And he said, "Mitch." And yeah, he was a great jazz player in his day in the 40s. And so I went up to him and I said, "Hey, Mitch, I heard you playing on the PA system. It sounded amazing." He goes, "Thanks, Dana. I like your sound too." And it was like, wow, I got a an A-OK for Mitch, and it was like one of those moments of like, whew, So anyway, this was the place where I had met Mark. Three Colors had played a set, and his band called Sandman were playing following Three Colors, and the band he had before, to Treat Her Right, was called Sandman. It was he on guitar, and hmm, sorry, I don't remember the rest of the players.
I heard it has a baritone sax in the
He
band.
had a baritone player as well. Mike was his first name, I'm pretty sure. Uh, and so, yeah, the sound, he had the kind of sound going. And I was listening and hearing him was like, wow, this is different, because a lot of bands at the time were very punk or new wave or kind of aggressive and noise driven. And Mark was playing very kind of bluesy roots, but original stuff. But and he had, of course, this charisma that was just magnetic. The minute you saw him, you're just like, wow, who's this guy? So I guess after the set, it was like we just hung out, and he invited me to his apartment, bring my horn, and I did. And he was working on a one string. Actually, Three Colors had broken up. I think that's what happened, and we had come back from England. It broke up, and Mark called me and said, "Hey, come on by and jam," which was very generous and kind. And because I was feeling pretty lost at the time, having, put a lot of my life into this thing, and it didn't turn out, trying to figure out what was going to happen next. Yeah, well, I went to his apartment, and was working, and was working on this instrument. And it was a kind of a combination of this he loved cheap guitars, finding them in pawn shops or any kind of secondhand store you can think of, a vintage place. Or he loved collecting old instruments, old guitars, and he had picked up this one piece. It was kind of plastic looking thing, it looked like almost like a toy. Had some push button pickups, but he had strung one string across the neck, and had lifted it up off the neck. So basically taking the idea of pressing the string to the neck was not an option. You couldn't do it if you tried. And using a slide, and he was, basing everything off of the root note of the open string of that slide note, that one note, and then using the slide to kind of hit the octave or hit the fourth or fifth, and moving in between. It had this very kind of upright bass vibe to it, very like a walking bass, but even more fluid. And he tuned the one string to pretty much my lowest note on the baritone, happened to be a D, the concert D. and it just like clicked. It's like, there was like the two sounds there was just room for both of these instruments to kind of move around itself without, sometimes a chord can be so demonstrative that it doesn't really leave you any room. So making that up, it was kind of one of those moments of eureka. This is something. I thought it sounded great. Mark, I think the light bulb went off in his head. He said, okay, now we need a drummer. We got Jerome Deupree, and went into Jerome's rehearsal studio for a couple sessions, and Mark had some songs that he was, applying to this sound. And that was basically what became our first record, our good.
Awesome. Um, how long did you guys feel like comfortable writing in this configuration, which says completely out of any pattern for a rock band?
Oh, it wasn't for for us, it was just doing what we do. You don't think about it any other way. It's just like, okay, you play that, I'll play this, and away we go, you know.
All right. Back before Morphin, I know you've been in Twitter, right? Not as a band member officially, but you were there. Could you tell me a bit about this period?
All right. Well, that was a band that consisted of Mark Sandman, David Champagne on guitar, sometimes slide guitar, like a 5-string, Billy Conway on the cocktail drum, and which is an interesting instrument. He played it standing up. If you picture a long floor tom with a kick drum mallet on the bottom. All right, my dog is scratching at the door. Hold on.
Just give you the yeah. It's
Yeah, so you got the floor tom acting as a kick drum from below, and then you're playing the top head with sticks. And he had some bongos set up, so he had a very unique kind of drum setup, and I think a tambourine and maybe a hi hat, and then Jimmy Fitting on harmonica, who was just amazing. He puts the harm in harmonica, I always say, because he's just one of the greatest harp players ever was. And that sound, it was like very, reminiscent and um, turning the page on what Muddy Waters was doing, but with a more kind of a newer, contemporary, of the moment vibe. And they played all over the country. They'd get in a van and drive. And so I was a fan right from the start. I just loved, one thing, I dabbled playing the harp. So hearing Jimmy was the one thing that really struck me about the band. And I was really interested in how he got a sound. And so I was became very much a fan right from the start. And I was a young person ready to do and go anywhere. And so there was an opportunity to become, to help out on the road. One of their guys had, calling it quits. And so basically I took over that position and became a guitar tech. That was right around the same time that Mark and I were, well, yeah, because the Treater was starting to fade, because they were kind of feeling some growing pains, I think, on a lot of fronts. And they had some, success with RCA, but that kind of went south and sour. So I think like a shark, it had to keep moving, else it would die. So it was either up or down. And I think once the RCA thing kind of fell apart, the writing was on the wall that the guys were going to try something else, go their separate ways musically. At any rate, before that, just as that was sort of kind of coming down, that's when Morphine was coming up. Mark was sort of getting that going, and everyone was very friendly about the whole thing. But I was a guitar tech with Treater Wright as Morphine was sort of emerging at the same time as Treater Wright was ending. And I was, it was sad for me to see that, because I love the band. And
how was the reaction in the beginning of Morphin playing with the band? It's in this different style.
yeah, we in the beginning we played primarily in a place called the Middle East. This was a great little restaurant in Cambridge that was one of the few places that really took it pride in, taking care of the musicians. And they'd put out food like large plates of hummus and bread and baba ganoush and home cooked falafel. And and they would feed everybody. And you'd get up and you wouldn't get paid much, but it was a place to play. And that was the kind of where we started. And we would play in between a lot of hard guitar noise bands. So you'd get something really loud and hit you over the head kind of a sound. And then we'd come on. And then last band would be a similar kind of barrage of electric guitar and stuff. So strangely enough, we fit in because people were happy to have a little bit of a break, kind of a palate cleanser.
Yeah, definitely calls attention as well in the middle of.
And so we were pretty well received right from the start, which was kind of surprising. You look up and you think, hey, wait a minute, they like this stuff. All right, let's keep doing it. And it kind of grew, as we were just in a very fertile period of time. We wanted to play, we wanted to create, we wanted to record. We're figuring out, how to do it, learning about recording, learning about playing live, learning about playing our instruments. So it was, and we had no other real commitments in our lives, so we could really put ourselves into it. I was a house painter and had been for many years just to make ends meet. And I would do that too, so that I could peel up and go on tour if I had to. You hold on, my dog is driving me nuts. He's scratching on every door.
It's okay. All right, next question here. One of the cool things about having a podcast is that you got to ask about your favorite albums. So I'm gonna ask about my favorite album from our fan, which is Cure for Pain. Could you tell me a bit about the story behind writing and recording this true masterpiece?
Well, let's see. Well, best I can recollect, that kind of, there's a couple of things about that record that makes it, in my opinion, so strong. First part, I guess, would be the fact that we, as a band, had played quite a bit by that time before going into the studio, and we had just come back from a tour, I believe, in the West Coast, and we went directly into the studio, and so we were ready to record, and we're in playing shape, so to speak. Jerome Deupree's drumming, in particular, was in top form in a way that really sets this whole tempo and tone of the record from beginning to end. And then you have the fact that we used Fort Apache with Paul Coldery, who was a good friend of ours, and at a point in time when the state of the art was like Studer boards and 2-inch tape, 2-inch reel-to-reel tape. So all of these things combined, of course, Mark's brilliance and performance, exquisite performance of Sandman, and you have kind of nailed it in a way. Jerome went in. We got drum sounds. Apparently, this is the story that I was probably noodling or doodling in the kitchen somewhere. But as they were getting drum sounds, and then once we got drum sounds, we kind of went through it in a one pass kind of a thing for each song. And Jerome, I think, I'm not sure if the entire record, but I think Buena in particular, he thought that he was still doing a sound check when it was actually a take, and it is the take that's on the record.
Yes.
So Jerome is like, he is so good that he can't do anything but be perfect and be incredible. So even when he's thinking he's just testing things out, he's amazing. So it really kind of tells you that sometimes it's hard to understand where you're at in the moment until you look back on it. And that record kind of came together pretty quickly in one fell swoop, because those songs were ready to come out and to be recorded, and we were in a great era for recording, not only in terms of the equipment, but for the people who were involved, like Paul Coldery's, his ambitions in terms of his recording were growing and developing, and everyone had a lot of like ambition to make something good.
Cool. All right. There is something that was caught my curiosity, actually, is the last song from Cure for Pain's called Miles Davis' Funeral. What's that about?
Well, I wasn't on that track, but from what I understand, that was done at Mark's loft on a. That's probably one of the few tracks that isn't hasn't been wasn't recorded the way I was just described. This was done as a kind of addition to that session, and Mark recorded it on 8-track cassette in his loft on the day that Miles Davis had his funeral. So it was a somber memorial to Miles on the day that of his funeral. And Mark had with him some friends that were playing on that. Ken Winokur, I believe it was Billy on the drums. I'll have to check the notes. And he had his tritar on that track, which is an instrument that he was working on, which consists of three, bass string with two guitar strings that are played in unison. So you get the bass and this kind of double string sound. That's what I know about that song.
Awesome. You have a specific technique of playing with two saxophones at the same time that you use in the song Rather from the album Yes. How did you come up with it?
Oh, it's not that hard, really. It's like if you ever, used two straws before, you can do the same. It's pretty much the same thing. Yeah, and it's if you've seen Rahsaan Roland Kirk, then you can see that it's what I'm doing is quite simpler than what he is doing. He's like the master who developed a whole technique. I think he to the extent where some of his instruments were modified to allow him to produce sounds the range of the instrument from top to bottom with only one hand, so he could actually get more notes out of his instrument. For me, I'm relegated to what I can pull up with one hand on each instrument, so it's kind of limited, and it's really not that complicated. Any sax player who's ever had two saxophones in close proximity probably has tried this and can tell you it's not that hard.
Cool.
Mark picked up on it and he said, "Oh wow, I'm gonna write a song that you can do that on." And so he wrote a couple songs specifically so that we could pull that out and people would go, "Wow!" But in fact, it's not that hard. Really.
Cause a lot of attention. It looks pretty beautiful on
Yeah,
stage.
it does, but it's kind of a trick. It's kind of it's a bit of a circus act, really.
Cool. All right. And after Cure for Pen, you guys signed it with DreamWorks, which was like a major and huge label back then. And released two albums, of the last two albums of Morphine, which were like Swimming and The Night. How was working under the pressure and expectation of a major label, and how much do you think it
Not
was
that one.
reflect on
I
those
don't have the
two?
energy. I don't have the energy to go into that one. It's like that is a whole other hour.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, it's like I really don't. I've talked about this a lot, and it was excruciatingly hard, that record, and it took a lot out of everybody.
Okay.
There's plenty of articles out there that can describe it, but it was a labor in all senses of the word. But I will tell you, when it was finished, we finally had finished it. I knew Mark was pleased with the results. For the first time, we all, took a big sigh and breath, and went off to play in Europe, knowing that we had done something that we were proud of finally. And unfortunately, Mark did not come back with us on that trip. But I think it was definitely one of his masterpieces.
Yes. All right. Let's move on. So, how was your life after the end of Morphine? Did you take a break from music? Did you engage in other projects?
Well, after Morphine, I didn't know what to do, really. Didn't have a lot of energy or interest or ambitions left, having just seen my best friend pass away. So didn't really think I would be doing much of anything, but I remember that Mike Rivard, who has a band called Club Delph, you can check these guys out. They're amazing. Mike was a good friend of Mark's, and Mike played bass on a lot of stuff. He played bass on The Night. He played upright bass on The Night as well. And he was in a band called Hypnosonics, which he was pretty much the band he was playing. That was a band with Mark. Mike Rivard, Russ Gershon on tenor, Tom Halter on trumpet, Jay Hilt on drums, myself on baritone. And we played, you know, when we came home off the road, but the band had been around for way before Morphine. So anyway, Mike Rivard invited us to come and play with his band Club Delph, Billy and myself. And it was and I hadn't really opened up my sax case since. So I went and played, and it was like, okay, yeah, I guess I got to keep playing here. This is something I got to keep doing.
Which year was that?
Oh, well, this was, still 99. Mark passed away in July, so this was probably, in the fall. So anyway, yeah, at the same time we had Mark's studio, which was High and Dry, was where he lived and where we had set up his own home studio where we did a lot of the work for the night. And Billy, myself, and our good friend Andrew Mazzoni, I should say, both who have now passed away, we decided that we were going to try to do what we could to keep the space, keep High and Dry working, and working as a studio, working as a viable space, and somehow keep the doors open. We had rent parties where we'd have bands playing and people would come up and donate. We did a lot of records. Billy and Andrew were like producing records, pretty much 7 days a week. I unfortunately, by 2000, I'm saying unfortunately, wasn't able to be as involved in the early days, but fortunately for me, because I had a young child at that time, and my daughter was born in 2001. So I would get there when I could, but it was mostly because of Billy and Andrew's work that kept those doors open. And in the process of that, Billy's partner, Laurie Sargent, began making a record at High and Dry. And at the time when I could, I'd be there, part of it. And Laurie was very welcoming, having me there. And at one point, her record turned into Twinemen, which was a record that a couple of records we made with Billy, Laurie, myself, and alternating bass players. And that was an environment where we started to write our own music and sing for the first time out front. And, one of Billy's songs was Who's Gonna Sing? And this is a song that came out of a question, when Mark passed away, who's going to sing? Well, the answer is we're all going to sing. And Laurie was very, very strong and encouraging to getting us back out there and creating and making music and playing. So she pretty much pulled us out of what could have been an early retirement. So that was the environment after post-morphine. And then out of that, it was a year past Mark's passing when we decided that we needed to, or leading up to the year that Mark died, we also were constructed. This is before Twinemen, actually. This is more like 2000, 2001. We were doing a band called Orchestra Morphine, which was a 9-piece band with the intention of playing the music from the night specifically, and some Hypnosonic songs, because some of the band members were part of the Hypnosonics band. Mike Rivard, Russ Gershon, Tom Halter. In addition to that, we had Christian McNeil on vocals, amazing singer from Derry, Ireland, who emigrated to Boston and became a main feature in the scene and a close friend. You should check out his music. He's an amazing singer and writer.
Yes.
And then his band High Brazil was pretty popular in Europe for some time. And then Evan Harriman on keyboards. And then we had both Jerome and Billy on drums, which was how the night drum tracks were created. So we had a 3-piece horn section, keyboards, bass, and 2 vocalists with Laurie Sargent and Christian McNeil, and 2 drummers. And so we did the music from the night. And we took that back to Palestrina the town in where Mark passed away a year later, and played the same festival following year.
How was being there?
It was amazing. It's been part of our family ever since. The town, the people of the town, we have a deep connection there. And it's a place I would recommend visiting if you're a Morphine fan. There's a very strong energy there.
Yeah, so the documentary does a sign with Mark's name
Yep.
there. It's very
Yep.
beautiful.
The staircase, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I hope we can go there one day.
I hope
All
you
right.
can.
2009, you started Vapors of Morphine, which is an incredible band with two incredible albums. How was this process of recording?
Well, this kind of dovetails into our or what we were just speaking of, because we were invited to come back to Palestrina on the 5th anniversary of Mark's passing. And at this point, I wanted to bring a trio as opposed to the big band, just to kind of see what that felt like to play the music as we used to play it. And in 2005, Katrina hit New Orleans and displaced a lot of people. And one of the people that it had displaced was this person by the name of Jeremy Lyons, who came up to Cambridge after being having to evacuate his home in New Orleans. And we became friends through a mutual friend. And I was just really enamored with his playing and who he was and his ability. And I thought, well, hey, maybe he'd be interested in learning some of these songs on guitar, slide guitar, and we could do this trio. So Jeremy took it upon himself to learn the songs, but he also went even a step further and had a 2-string bass created by a mutual friend of Jeremy's and Mark's, a very amazing guy by the name of Robbie Washtub Phillips, who's incredible inventor and maker of instruments. And he had made himself these 1-string basses out of cocktail drums and upright bass necks fabricated together. He just amazing instrument maker. So Robbie had made Jeremy a 2-string slide bass based off of Mark's idea, which Robbie, of course, was very familiar with, knowing Mark as well as he did. And so the sound of that first rehearsal with that 1-string, it was like, wow, okay, there's the sound, And we never really wanted to be Mark, or to try to imitate him, but we thought the songs deserved, being heard in that manner, and who best to do it but ourselves. So I think Jeremy brings two things. He brings this amazing musicianship and his knowledge of the blues and sensibility, but he also sings these songs in a way that isn't trying to impersonate Mark. It's just singing the way he would sing the songs. So there you have, we were started as members of Morphine, and then, how every band goes through names. We had the ever expanding Elastic Waist Band. And then somebody once said, well, you guys going to go see that band Vapors of Morphine? And they thought they were being funny or insulting. And someone had told us about it, and we said, wow, that's great, we'll take it. So that's been our name.
I noticed that in the 2 albums released by Vapors and Morphine that you guys brought a lot of new musical influence to the table, like country, reggae, mambo. How was experimenting with these new styles?
Yeah, I mean, it's just stuff that we like to listen to that we, might want to try playing. It's we love African music from Mali. I love a lot of dub reggae. I like stuff that you can kind of get a trance, kind of creating a trance and getting into a pocket. And that's just kind of what interests us in terms of what we like to hear. So we try to reinterpret some songs that in some cases not very well, but we enjoy it nonetheless.
Cool. All right. Dana, thanks a lot for taking your time for this conversation. That was a huge honor to have here during Come True, really. So thanks a lot, man.
All right. We'll talk soon. Send me the link when you get it together.
Thanks, man.
All right, my friend. Have a good one. Bye.
You too.